Ladies, I want you to lean in for this one because what I'm about to share might save your heart, your time, and your peace of mind. Now listen, I don't say this to scare you. I say this to prepare you because when it comes to relationships, the truth is love isn't enough. You need clarity. You need awareness. And most importantly, you need to stop ignoring the red flags that are silently screaming for your attention. When a man begins to emotionally disconnect, it's one of the earliest and most telling signs that something is shifting beneath the surface of the relationship. You start to notice it not in the loud arguments or the big moments, but in the quiet ones when he's sitting right next to you but feels a million miles away. The way he looks at you changes. Conversations become shallow. He no longer asks how your day was with genuine curiosity. And even when you share, he seems distracted or uninterested. You can feel that something is missing, but it's not easy to put your finger on it at first. Emotional disconnection doesn't happen overnight. It's gradual. Maybe he used to light up when you walked into the room. Maybe he used to text you sweet things during the day or call just to hear your voice. But now, those things are rare, if not completely gone. You're left wondering if you did something wrong, if you're no longer interesting, or if you somehow became invisible. But deep down, you know it's not about you. It's about where his heart and mind are going. You try to re-engage. You bring up meaningful conversations, ask him about his dreams, talk about the relationship, but he brushes it off or gives one-word answers. There's a wall now, an invisible barrier that keeps him emotionally guarded. You sense that he's no longer investing in the relationship emotionally, and it creates a disconnect that is painful and confusing. Physical intimacy might still be there in small doses, but even that begins to feel mechanical, like it's missing soul, the warmth, the presence, the attentiveness. It's faded. What makes emotional disconnection so dangerous is that it often opens the door to someone else. When a man feels like he can no longer express himself or be emotionally vulnerable with the woman he's with, whether due to his own issues or lack of interest, may start seeking that connection elsewhere. It might start as casual conversations with someone who listens without judgment, laughs at his jokes, or makes him feel alive again. And from there, if boundaries aren't in place, it can spiral into something deeper, something that leads to betrayal. At the core, emotional disconnection means he's no longer pouring into the relationship. He stopped nurturing it. He stopped being curious about your world. And as he pulls back, you find yourself doing all the emotional, heavy lifting, initiating talks, holding space, trying to fix what feels broken, even if you're not sure how it broke. The more you try, the more drained you feel because you're giving energy to someone who's no longer meeting you halfway. When a man constantly blames you for everything, it's not just frustrating, it's a warning sign that he's emotionally deflecting and possibly setting the stage to justify betrayal. This pattern of behavior often begins subtly. Maybe he starts criticizing how you communicate, saying you're too emotional or too sensitive, then it escalates. Suddenly, every disagreement turns into an opportunity for him to point the finger at you, no matter how minor the issue is. It doesn't matter if he forgot to call, if he showed up late, or if he crossed a boundary somehow, it always becomes your fault. This blame game is manipulative and emotionally exhausting. It places you in a position where you constantly second guess yourself. You begin to wonder, am I really overreacting? Or maybe I should have done it differently. Over time, this wears down your confidence and creates an unhealthy power dynamic. He positions himself as the victim while painting you as the cause of all the problems. This isn't just about avoiding accountability, it's about controlling the narrative. When a man refuses to take responsibility for his actions, especially consistently, he's creating emotional distance and building resentment. That resentment can then be used as a false justification for stepping outside the relationship. He'll convince himself that because you're too much, not supportive, or always complaining, he has a right to find peace or attention elsewhere. This kind of thinking isn't honest, it's self-serving. And it often begins long before any actual cheating takes place. What's even more damaging is how this blame affects your emotional stability. You start internalizing his words. Instead of recognizing toxic behavior, you start blaming yourself for the way he treats you. It's a slow erosion of self-worth. You may try harder to please him, to fix things, to avoid conflict, thinking that if you just do things right, he'll stop lashing out. But the goalpost always moves. No matter what you do, there's always something he finds wrong. This pattern also creates a toxic emotional cycle. He gets to act out, lash out, or pull away, and when you react to his behavior, he flips it and makes your reaction the issue. It's a loop designed to protect his ego while draining your emotional energy. It prevents true connection, accountability, and growth. And it makes it easier for him to disconnect from the relationship on an emotional and moral level, because in his eyes, he's already decided that you are the problem. When a man blames you consistently, he's not just being difficult, avoiding his own growth. He's choosing to deflect instead of reflect. He's creating a dynamic where he can justify distance, disrespect, or disloyalty, and over time, that blame becomes his excuse for behaviors that cross emotional and physical boundaries. When a man becomes secretive with his phone, it's often more than just a desire for privacy. It can be a major sign that something deeper is going on. In a healthy relationship, transparency builds trust. There's a mutual understanding that both partners respect each other's space, but also feel safe enough to share without fear. When that balance is broken and he starts acting overly protective of his phone, it's usually not just coincidence. At first, it might look like harmless behavior. Maybe he starts putting his phone face down more often, or he jumps to grab it the second it lights up. Maybe he used to scroll casually beside you, sharing funny memes or reading messages aloud, but now he pulls away or turns the screen away when you get close. These little actions start to feel intentional, like he's hiding something, even if he hasn't said a word. Then there's a change in his phone habits. He might suddenly have a new lock screen password, one he doesn't share with you like he used to. Or maybe he takes his phone with him everywhere, even into the bathroom, or just to grab something from another room. If you ask him about it, he might brush it off or get defensive, making you feel like you're overthinking or being insecure. But deep down, you know the energy has shifted. What's even more telling is when notifications start disappearing. He could turn off message previews, silence certain apps, or delete messages altogether. These are not the habits of someone who's simply valuing privacy. These are often the behaviors of someone trying to cover their tracks. The secrecy begins to create distance emotionally and physically. You start wondering who he's texting late at night, why he suddenly steps outside to take certain calls, or why he seems more glued to his screen than present with you. This kind of behavior doesn't always mean he's already cheating, but it often signals that emotional lines are being crossed the door, that he's opening the door to conversations and connections that don't belong in a committed relationship. When a man is faithful and transparent, he doesn't feel the need to hide or overprotect his phone. He doesn't get anxious when you're near it or quickly change the screen when you glance his way. He doesn't accuse you of being nosy for noticing the change because he has nothing to hide. The phone, in many modern relationships, becomes a window into someone's emotional world. Who they talk to, how often, what they say, it all reflects where their energy and attention are going. So when that window is suddenly covered, locked, or blocked, it's not unreasonable to wonder what's happening on the other side. The secrecy creates a wedge, and that wedge grows with every moment of suspicion or avoidance. You're left feeling disconnected, excluded, and uneasy, even if he insists everything is fine. When a man starts accusing you of cheating without any real reason, it often reveals more about what's going on inside him than what's happening with you. This behavior is usually rooted in guilt, projection, or a desire to shift focus away from his own questionable actions. At first, it might seem random or even a little confusing. He might say things like, "You're being too friendly with that guy," or "Why are you always on your phone?" even though nothing in your behavior has changed. These accusations seem to come out of nowhere and they catch you off guard. What makes this especially toxic is how it places you on the defensive. You find yourself explaining, justifying, or trying to prove your loyalty for something you never even did. And while you're busy defending your actions, he successfully redirected the attention away from his own behavior. This is classic projection. Often, when someone is doing something wrong, they assume the other person is doing it too. It's a way to ease their own guilt by convincing themselves that cheating is a two-way street, even when it's not. This tactic also plays on your emotions. It creates doubt, confusion, and anxiety. You may start to question if you did something to trigger his suspicion. You might try to change your behavior to avoid conflict, stop talking to male friends, be more open with your phone, even over-explain your whereabouts. All of this is designed to put you in a corner where your focus is no longer on his actions, but on proving your innocence. And the more energy you put into that, the less attention you have left to see the real red flags. There's also an element of control at play here. Accusing you of cheating gives him a sense of power. It puts you in a weakened emotional state, constantly trying to reassure him, constantly trying to regain his trust, even though you didn't break it. And in doing so, he avoids having to explain his own lack of trustworthiness. In some cases, these false accusations are used to manipulate you into isolating yourself from friends, changing how you move, and becoming more dependent on him emotionally. It's a subtle form of emotional manipulation that can escalate if left unchecked. Another layer to this is the psychological discomfort of living a double life. If a man is cheating or planning to cheat, his inner conflict may cause him to lash out in irrational ways. Accusing you of doing the very thing he's doing creates a false sense of balance in his mind. It's as if he feels justified in his actions because he's convinced himself that you're not being honest either. And when confronted, he might double down acting hurt, betrayed, or even angry as if he's the victim in the situation. This can leave you emotionally drained, confused, and unsure of where you even stand. When a man stops putting in effort, it's a clear indication that the emotional investment in the relationship is starting to fade. In the beginning, he may have gone out of his way to make you feel seen, valued, and wanted. He planned dates, texted you good morning, remembered the little things you said, and paid attention to your emotional needs. But now, things have shifted. The calls become less frequent, the texts feel more like routine than genuine connection, and he no longer takes initiative to do the small things that once brought you closer. This drop in effort is not just about being busy or going through a phase. It's often the result of emotional detachment, disinterest, or in some cases, an internal shift where he's no longer prioritizing the relationship the way he used to. You begin to notice that you're the one always reaching out, the one initiating conversations, planning the time together, keeping the connection alive. It starts to feel one-sided, and the emotional labor becomes heavier and heavier on your end. There's also a difference in how he reacts to your needs. Where he once listened and tried to understand, now he seems annoyed or indifferent. Your concerns might be brushed off, your emotions minimized, and your requests seen as nagging instead of an invitation to grow together. The effort he once gave without hesitation now feels like a burden to him. This lack of effort creates emotional distance that slowly erodes the foundation of the relationship. When effort disappears, so does intentionality. He stops making plans for the future, avoids deeper conversations, and becomes passive in resolving conflicts. This often signals a man who is emotionally checking out, even if he hasn't physically left the relationship yet. And when someone checks out emotionally, they become vulnerable to outside temptations. He may begin seeking validation, excitement, or connection elsewhere, not always with the intention to cheat at first, but because he's no longer fueling what he has at home. The absence of effort is also a silent message that speaks volumes. It says, I'm no longer trying to grow this with you. It says, I don't care enough to fix what's broken. It's not always about loud arguments or obvious betrayal. Sometimes the biggest red flag is simply his silence, his passivity, his refusal to show up when it matters most. You find yourself fighting for a relationship alone, hoping that the version of him who once showed up with energy and love will return. This type of emotional neglect can be just as painful as any form of betrayal. It creates a void where love used to live. You start to feel like a burden instead of a blessing, like your presence no longer lights him up. And the longer this continues, the more you begin to lose your own sense of worth inside the relationship. When a man begins to criticize you more often, especially in ways that feel unnecessary or harsh, it's not just about him having high standards or being honest. It's often a reflection of deeper dissatisfaction or internal conflict that he hasn't communicated. At first, the criticism might seem small or even masked as jokes. He might comment on your appearance, your habits, the way you talk, or how you handle situations. But over time, the remarks become more frequent, more pointed, and less constructive. They're no longer about improvement, they're about diminishing you. This pattern of criticism chips away at your self-esteem. It creates an emotional environment where you start questioning yourself constantly. You wonder if you're good enough, attractive enough, smart enough, or even lovable. You may begin walking on eggshells trying to avoid triggering another negative comment. What used to feel like a safe, loving space now feels like a test you keep failing. And while he may claim he's just being honest or that he wants the best for you, the truth is that healthy love builds, not breaks. Often, when a man is internally struggling with commitment, temptation, or emotional disconnect, he externalizes that discomfort by finding flaws in his partner. It becomes easier to criticize than to take accountability for what he's feeling. Instead of saying, I'm emotionally distant, he says, you're too needy. Instead of saying, I'm bored and don't know how to fix it, he says, you're not exciting anymore. The criticism becomes a tool to distance himself without addressing the real issues at hand. There's also a psychological tactic at play, whether conscious or not. By lowering your self-esteem, he shifts the power dynamic. If you start to believe you're not enough, you're more likely to tolerate disrespect, more likely to overcompensate, and less likely to question his actions. This gives him the emotional upper hand, and that imbalance can allow him to explore outside attention without feeling as guilty. In his mind, he may even justify cheating by convincing himself that you're not the same or not trying anymore, when in reality, it's his projection of dissatisfaction that's changed the tone of the relationship. Another layer to this is how criticism masks emotional avoidance. Instead of being vulnerable about what's bothering him, whether it's something internal or external, he redirects that frustration onto you. And because you love him, you take it seriously. You try to fix it, adjust, improve. But no matter what you change, the criticism doesn't stop because it was never really about you to begin with. Being in a space where you're constantly criticized by someone who once made you feel adored is deeply confusing. The mixed signals wear you down. One day he compliments you, the next day he picks you apart. That inconsistency becomes emotionally destabilizing. And in that confusion, you begin to accept treatment that once would have been unacceptable. The relationship shifts from a place of mutual admiration to a cycle of judgment and emotional withdrawal. When a man suddenly becomes too busy, it's often not just about a packed schedule, it's about changing priorities and shifting emotional focus. In a healthy relationship, people make time for what they value. Life can absolutely get hectic with work, responsibilities, and stress piling up. But even during those seasons, a man who is truly invested in you will still find a way to be present. When he wants to, he will. So when that effort suddenly disappears and "I'm busy" becomes a regular excuse, it's a signal that something deeper is going on. It often starts with subtle changes. Maybe he used to call every night before bed, but now days go by without a check-in. Maybe you used to go on regular dates, and now weeks pass without any intentional time together. You start hearing phrases like, "I've just got a lot on my plate," or "I'm trying to focus on myself right now." These statements sound reasonable at first, but the consistency of the man, the lack of effort to balance things out, begins to tell a different story. Time is the most valuable thing anyone can give. And when a man stops giving you his time, what he's really doing is creating distance. He's pulling away without saying it outright. He's hoping that the excuse of being busy will be enough to keep you from asking deeper questions. But underneath the surface, this often signals that his attention is somewhere else or on someone else. Whether it's another woman, a growing interest in someone new, or simply emotional disconnection from the relationship, the lack of time is rarely just about being overwhelmed. What makes this behavior more concerning is when the busy excuse doesn't seem to apply to other areas of his life. He still finds time for his friends, for social media, for hobbies, or to scroll on his phone for hours. He's responsive to other people, but slow to answer your texts. He shows up for everyone else but you. That kind of selective effort reveals where his emotional energy is going, and it's often not into the relationship. The absence of time and effort creates space for emotional and physical temptation to enter. When a man feels disconnected but avoids the hard conversation, he might look outside the relationship for validation, for escape, or for the excitement he's no longer seeking with you. He may not admit it, but by becoming unavailable, he's laying the groundwork to justify future behavior. He'll say things like, "We were barely talking," or "You seem distant too," ignoring the fact that he was the one pulling away. This kind of avoidance isn't just neglect, it's a slow erosion of intimacy. You begin to feel like you're no longer a priority, like you're waiting for his attention, chasing moments that used to come naturally. And while you're still holding on to the relationship, he's already halfway out the door, hiding behind a schedule that somehow always has room for everything but you. When a man starts flirting with other women, especially in front of you or in ways that make you uncomfortable, it's not just harmless behavior or a personality quirk. It's a direct reflection of where his boundaries lie and how seriously he values your relationship. Flirting can often be dismissed as playful or innocent, but when it's consistent, intentional, or disrespectful to your presence, it signals a much deeper problem. It shows that he's willing to entertain the attention of others, even at the risk of making you feel undervalued or disrespected. This kind of behavior often starts subtly. He might compliment another woman a little too much, linger in conversations that cross emotional lines, or become overly friendly in ways that feel inappropriate. You may start to notice how his eyes wander, how he lights up around certain women, how he initiates unnecessary contact or engages in private messages you're not aware of. When confronted, he might downplay it, say you're being jealous, overreacting, or reading into things too much. That's not clarity, that's deflection. The reality is, when a man is truly committed, he naturally sets boundaries with other women. He doesn't seek validation outside the relationship. He doesn't need to test the waters or keep backup options close by. Flirting, especially when repeated or done in secrecy, is not just about attraction, it's about ego, attention, and often a desire to feel desired by someone new. And when he starts entertaining that desire, he's already stepping away from the emotional exclusivity that a relationship demands. There's also a deeper layer to this, which is emotional betrayal. Even if physical lines haven't been crossed yet, consistent flirting opens the door to emotional connections that don't belong in your relationship. It's a form of micro cheating, where the intention isn't always to cheat physically, but to create an emotional spark elsewhere. These moments, these small emotional exchanges, start to accumulate. And before long, that connection he once prioritized with you starts to get replaced by someone else's attention. You may start to feel like you're competing in your own relationship, trying harder to be noticed, to gain back his focus, to prove that you're still the one he should be captivated by. But that kind of dynamic is deeply unhealthy. You should never have to fight for your man's attention when he's already committed to you. When someone chooses you, they choose you fully, not half-heartedly, not with wandering eyes, and not with playful disrespect. Flirting also sets a dangerous tone in the relationship. It normalizes emotional carelessness. It teaches you to tolerate behavior that deep down doesn't sit right with your spirit. It sends the message that your comfort comes second to his desire for attention. And once that line is crossed repeatedly, it's much easier for him to justify stepping further into private conversations, emotional intimacy, and eventually full-blown betrayal. When a man becomes overly defensive or hostile when you ask about his behavior, it's often a sign that he's hiding something or doesn't feel emotionally safe in the relationship anymore. In healthy partnerships, open communication is key. If something feels off, it's natural to want clarity, and it's reasonable to ask questions to understand what's going on. However, when you ask these questions and his response is to get defensive, dismissive, or even angry, it reveals a deeper issue. This behavior often comes in the form of deflection or outright hostility. Instead of answering your concerns with honesty, he redirects the conversation. He may accuse you of being paranoid, insecure, or controlling for simply asking about his actions. His tone shifts, and the situation that started with a simple inquiry about his behavior now escalates into an argument, leaving you feeling like the one in the wrong. This manipulation tactic is designed to shift the focus away from the issue at hand and onto your perceived flaws, making it seem like you're overreacting or being irrational. But behind the defensiveness is often guilt, discomfort, or fear. If he's hiding something, whether it's emotional disconnection or an affair, he becomes incredibly protective of his secrets. He may not even realize it, but the defensiveness becomes his shield to protect the truth. Every time you ask about his actions or the way he's treating you, he feels cornered, so he reacts aggressively to deflect the heat. This only works temporarily until the emotional tension grows too thick for him to ignore, but by then the damage to the trust in the relationship has already been done. Another part of the defensiveness is rooted in control. When a man refuses to have a calm conversation about his actions and instead becomes angry or cold, it's his way of reasserting dominance over the situation. Instead of engaging in a partnership where both people's feelings and concerns are heard and validated, he manipulates the conversation to keep you feeling unsure and small. You end up questioning your own judgment and feeling like you're walking on eggshells. Every time you ask a question, you wonder how he's going to react, which only makes it harder to trust him and speak openly. This cycle can lead to emotional exhaustion. The act of constantly questioning your reality and trying to navigate a relationship where honesty is met with hostility creates a toxic environment. When every conversation you have with him feels like a minefield, it can be incredibly draining. You start to question if you're being too demanding or too sensitive. Even though deep down, you're just trying to make sense of what feels off. As the defensive behavior continues, it erodes the emotional intimacy between you. Healthy relationships are built on trust and vulnerability. When one person is constantly defensive, that vulnerability isn't safe. It's replaced by walls, and the more walls that go up, the harder it becomes to repair the connection. The defensiveness doesn't just stop at conversations. It begins to seep into the daily interactions, making everything feel tense and uncertain. When a man begins to show a lack of interest in your needs, desires, or feelings, it's a significant red flag that should not be overlooked. In the beginning of a relationship, both partners are usually attentive to each other's needs, taking the time to listen, understand, and prioritize each other's happiness. However, when that attention fades and your feelings are either ignored or dismissed, it signals emotional detachment and a shift in priorities. This lack of consideration can manifest in many ways, but the overall effect is always the same. You start to feel invisible, unimportant, and emotionally neglected. This can start subtly. He may forget things that matter to you, like important dates, small preferences, or emotional needs. Initially, you might brush it off as him being forgetful or distracted by other things going on in his life. But over time, this becomes a pattern. He doesn't check in when you're having a tough day, doesn't ask how you're feeling, or fails to acknowledge the efforts you're making to maintain the relationship. The emotional connection starts to erode when the other person no longer feels compelled to care about how the other is doing. As this pattern continues, you might notice that your own emotional needs begin to feel secondary to his. You might find yourself adjusting to his mood, his schedule, and his needs while your own go unrecognized. This creates a dangerous imbalance in the relationship. The more you give, the less you receive, and over time, this can lead to feelings of resentment and frustration. You're left feeling as though your emotional presence is irrelevant to him. This neglect might not come from a place of malice, but from a lack of effort or emotional investment. As the emotional disconnect deepens, he might stop showing interest in your hobbies, dreams, or personal growth. In a healthy relationship, both partners support and encourage each other to pursue their passions and aspirations. But when a man becomes uninterested in the things that once mattered to you, it's a sign that he no longer sees your needs as important. He may stop asking about your goals or even dismiss them when you talk about them, signaling that your happiness and fulfillment are no longer a priority to him. This shift in focus can lead to emotional isolation. When your partner is emotionally absent, you start to feel like you're carrying the weight of the relationship alone. You may try to communicate your needs, express your emotions, or share your struggles, but all too often your efforts are met with indifference. He might offer generic responses or change the subject, leaving you feeling unheard and invalidated. This emotional detachment can be more painful than any physical betrayal because it signifies that your emotional connection is no longer valued. What's worse is that when your emotional needs go unmet, you start questioning yourself. You may wonder if you're asking for too much or if you're not deserving of the attention and care you crave. This self-doubt can take a toll on your self-esteem and leave you feeling unsure about the relationship. You may even start to question whether he truly loves or cares for you at all, or if you're simply an afterthought in his life. When a man becomes emotionally distant, it's often one of the most painful signs that something is wrong in the relationship. Emotional distance doesn't always appear as an outright sign of disinterest, but it becomes increasingly noticeable as time goes on. Initially, he may seem a bit preoccupied with work, family, or personal stress, but when this emotional withdrawal persists, it starts to create an unsettling gap between you and him. This distance can manifest in many ways: fewer conversations, less intimacy, and an overall lack of connection. He may no longer share his thoughts, feelings, or experiences the way he used to. In the beginning of a relationship, both partners usually feel open and comfortable expressing themselves. You would talk about your day, your dreams, your fears, and your future together. But when emotional distance sets in, these conversations become rare. He might give short, detached responses when you try to engage with him, or simply avoid meaningful discussions altogether. What was once a rich emotional bond turns into a quiet, detached space where communication becomes superficial and mechanical. Another way emotional distance shows up is through a lack of affection. Physical affection, which might have been a regular part of your relationship early on, starts to fade. Small gestures like holding hands, cuddling on the couch, or giving a spontaneous kiss on the cheek seem to disappear. The lack of affection can make you feel rejected or unimportant. It often signals that he's no longer emotionally invested in maintaining the closeness that once defined the relationship. Instead of feeling like his priority, you begin to feel like an afterthought, and the emotional warmth you once shared seems to vanish without explanation. The absence of emotional availability can also show up when you're dealing with tough situations. Relationships go through difficult times, and it's during these moments that emotional support is most crucial. However, when a man is emotionally distant, he may become less present during these trying moments. Instead of offering support, comfort, or simply being there for you, he becomes detached, uninterested, or even frustrated with your need for connection. This response can make you feel isolated, like you're navigating life's challenges alone. The man you once relied on to provide emotional stability is now absent in the most critical ways. As emotional distance grows, so does a sense of loneliness. When you're with someone but feel emotionally distant from them, it's a quiet form of rejection that can feel more painful than physical absence. You begin to question why the closeness is fading, why he no longer seems interested in your emotions or well-being. His focus shifts elsewhere, and you start wondering if there's something wrong with you. The more he withdraws, the more you may try to compensate by becoming more attentive, more patient, or more understanding, hoping that your efforts will bring him back. But this often leads to a one-sided effort where you're constantly trying to bridge the gap that he's created. The more emotionally distant he becomes, the more difficult it is to maintain any sort of meaningful connection. You're left feeling as though you're putting in all the work while he retreats further into his own world, uninterested in reconnecting. This lack of emotional engagement not only hurts, but can slowly break down the foundation of the relationship. Without that emotional connection, the bond that once held the relationship together starts to crumble, leaving both partners feeling lost and uncertain. When a man starts lying or hiding things from you, it's often a sign that he's trying to protect himself, his actions, or even his feelings. In a relationship built on trust and mutual respect, honesty is essential. But when a man begins to deceive, either through small white lies or by hiding bigger truths, it's a clear indicator that something is off. Initially, the lies might be small. He says he'll be somewhere and doesn't show up, or he downplays something that happened during the day. These early lies are easy to dismiss, especially when they don't seem like a big deal. However, as the lies continue, they build a wall of secrecy and mistrust between the two of you. A man who is emotionally connected to his partner will have no reason to hide things. He will communicate openly, even about difficult topics, because he values transparency. But when he begins to conceal parts of his life or avoid certain questions, it suggests that he's no longer invested in being completely honest with you. He might start changing his story, or you may catch him in contradictions that don't add up. What starts as innocent evasiveness becomes a pattern of dishonesty, and you begin to wonder what he's really hiding. Lying often stems from a deeper fear of judgment, fear of losing the relationship, or fear of confrontation. Instead of addressing an issue head on, he may choose to cover it up with lies, hoping that the truth won't come out. However, the truth has a way of surfacing, and when it does, it's often much worse than if he had been upfront from the start. Lying creates a sense of distance because it signals that the truth is no longer safe in the relationship. The more lies accumulate, the harder it becomes to trust anything he says, and that breaks down the emotional foundation of the relationship. Sometimes the lies are not just about events, but about emotions or intentions. He may say that everything is fine, even when you know it's not. He may pretend that he's happy when in reality, he's feeling disconnected or frustrated. When this happens, you're left with a false narrative of what's happening in the relationship. You start to feel like you're living in a world of half-truths and misrepresentations. It's exhausting to keep trying to piece together what's real when you're constantly met with a version of the truth that isn't fully accurate. What makes lying particularly harmful in a relationship is the erosion of trust. Trust is the bedrock of any partnership. Once that trust is broken, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild. Each lie chips away at the security you once felt, and over time, you begin questioning not just the current situation, but everything that has come before. If he's lied about one thing, what else is he hiding? The uncertainty eats away at the connection you once had, and you start to wonder if there's any sincerity left in the relationship. When a man lies, it can also be a reflection of his inability or unwillingness to confront difficult feelings or actions. Rather than being transparent about his emotions or shortcomings, he chooses deceit as a coping mechanism. This creates a toxic dynamic where honesty becomes a rare commodity and both partners are left feeling disconnected, unsure, and emotionally distant. When a man begins to withdraw affection or intimacy in the relationship, it can be one of the clearest signs that something is amiss. Affection and intimacy are the emotional glue that holds a relationship together. So when either or both begin to fade, it's natural to feel like something is wrong. Initially, you might notice small changes. Maybe he's not as touchy-feely as he used to be, or perhaps there are fewer spontaneous hugs, kisses, or compliments. These small signs can easily be overlooked, chalked up to busy schedules or temporary stress. But when the lack of affection becomes a consistent pattern, it's no longer something you can ignore. Physical affection, like holding hands, cuddling, or kissing, is one of the easiest ways to express love and connection. But when a man starts withdrawing from these simple gestures, it suggests a deeper emotional withdrawal. You may find yourself initiating affection more often than he does, and even then, his response may feel distant or obligatory. Instead of reciprocating with warmth, he may pull away, leaving you feeling rejected or unwanted. This shift is not just about physical touch, it's an emotional signal that he's no longer as emotionally available or invested in maintaining the closeness that you once shared. As affection fades, so does the emotional intimacy that was once a cornerstone of the relationship. Intimacy is about more than just sex. It's about emotional closeness, vulnerability, and the willingness to open up to each other. When a man begins to pull back, he's essentially closing himself off, making it harder for both of you to connect on a deeper level. Conversations that once felt personal and genuine start to feel superficial. He becomes less interested in how you're feeling, what's going on in your life, and what your hopes and dreams are. These moments of emotional neglect can leave you feeling disconnected, unsure of where you stand, and questioning whether he still values the bond you once had. It's important to note that emotional withdrawal is not always about a lack of attraction or desire. Sometimes a man may pull away due to stress, personal issues, or feeling overwhelmed. But when emotional withdrawal persists without an effort to communicate, it becomes more than just a passing phase. If he's no longer putting in the effort to show affection or be emotionally present, it suggests that he may be withdrawing for reasons that go beyond external pressures. His inability or unwillingness to engage in the relationship emotionally signals a shift in his feelings or priorities. This lack of affection and emotional engagement also affects the sense of security and trust in the relationship. When a man begins to withdraw, it creates an emotional void that can be hard to fill. You start to question what went wrong, whether it's something you've done or if he simply lost interest. The longer this withdrawal continues, the more the relationship feels one-sided, leaving you with the responsibility of trying to revive a connection that he's already checked out from. The more effort you put into fixing the relationship, the more frustrated and discouraged you become when he doesn't meet you halfway. When affection and intimacy begin to fade, it's a sign that emotional distance is growing, and with that, the risk of the relationship slowly deteriorating becomes greater. The lack of intimacy leaves both partners feeling unfulfilled, and without any action to address the disconnect, it's easy for the relationship to slip into a state of complacency or even resentment. Without open communication and effort from both sides to rebuild emotional closeness, affection, and intimacy, the relationship may become little more than a shell of what it once was. When a man stops prioritizing spending time with you or making you a priority in his life, it's a strong indicator that his commitment to the relationship may be fading. In the early stages of a relationship, there's usually an excitement and energy to spend as much time together as possible. You make plans, you enjoy each other's company, and you both prioritize one another in your busy lives. However, when a man starts to pull away from spending quality time with you, it suggests that his interest or commitment may be shifting elsewhere. This shift doesn't always happen overnight, but it can begin subtly. He might start canceling plans, showing up late, or simply not making the effort to spend as much time with you. When a man becomes distant in this way, it's easy to chalk it up to work commitments, personal stress, or other external factors. But over time, this behavior becomes a pattern, and it can be an indication that he's no longer valuing the relationship the way he once did. You start to feel like an afterthought, a convenience in his life rather than a priority. As time spent together decreases, you may also notice a decrease in the quality of that time. When you do manage to get together, the moments may feel rushed, distracted, or forced. He might be preoccupied with his phone, work, or other distractions, leaving you feeling as though you're not truly connecting. The conversations may become surface level, and he may stop making the effort to engage in deeper, meaningful discussions. This lack of effort shows that he no longer sees the need to invest emotionally or mentally in the relationship, leaving you feeling disconnected and unsupported. It's also important to recognize that when a man no longer prioritizes time with you, it reflects a shift in his priorities. In a committed relationship, both partners should make an effort to nurture their bond and ensure that the relationship stays strong. When one partner starts pulling away and making other things more important, it signals a lack of investment in the relationship. You might begin to feel like you're fighting for his attention or constantly trying to plan activities that he's no longer interested in. It creates a dynamic where you're left putting in all the effort to maintain the connection while he remains emotionally and physically distant. As this pattern continues, it becomes easier to notice how the imbalance affects the relationship. You begin to feel like you're walking on eggshells, unsure if he's going to cancel plans, if he's truly going to be present when you're together, or if he's even interested in being with you at all. This uncertainty creates frustration and confusion, making it difficult to know where you stand in his life. You may even begin to question your own worth and whether you're enough for him to prioritize. The longer the lack of attention and effort continues, the more you start to feel invisible and unimportant in his world. This dynamic can lead to feelings of emotional neglect. Relationships require effort from both sides to stay strong, and when that effort is one-sided, it leads to a sense of disconnection. The emotional distance that grows between the two of you only deepens as time goes on, and it becomes harder to bridge the gap. A relationship that was once built on shared moments and mutual care starts to feel like a distant memory, and the longing for emotional closeness remains unmet. The lack of time spent together, coupled with the absence of emotional effort, makes it incredibly difficult to sustain a meaningful connection. When a man consistently avoids conflict or becomes passive in addressing relationship issues, it can be a major sign of emotional disengagement or even avoidance of responsibility. Healthy relationships require open communication, especially when problems arise. It's natural for conflicts to occur. No relationship is without challenges. However, when one partner refuses to engage in these difficult conversations or constantly brushes off concerns, it creates an unhealthy dynamic where problems are never resolved. Over time, this lack of conflict resolution can build up tension, resentment, and frustration. Initially, when a man avoids conflict, it may seem like he's just trying to keep the peace or avoid unnecessary drama. He might claim that the issue isn't worth fighting over or that he doesn't want to argue. While this might seem considerate in the short term, it often becomes a pattern of avoidance that leads to deeper issues being left unresolved. Instead of dealing with problems head on, he withdraws from difficult conversations, hoping the issue will go away on its own. Unfortunately, issues don't simply disappear, they fester, and as time goes on, they can become much larger than they originally were. This avoidance often comes in the form of stonewalling, where he refuses to acknowledge or discuss the issue at hand. Instead of having an open dialogue where both partners express their feelings and work through the problem, he shuts down. He may give you short, non-committal responses or act indifferent, signaling that he's not interested in engaging with you emotionally. This silence becomes increasingly frustrating because you're left trying to navigate a relationship with someone who is no longer actively involved in maintaining it. When a man avoids conflict, it's also a reflection of his unwillingness to take responsibility for his actions. If something he did or said has hurt you, instead of acknowledging it and working to understand how it made you feel, he may deflect, deny, or simply change the subject. This refusal to take ownership of his behavior or its impact on you shows a lack of emotional maturity and accountability. In any healthy relationship, both partners should be able to admit when they're wrong, apologize when necessary, and work together to prevent the same issues from recurring. But when one partner consistently avoids this, it creates a lack of growth and stagnates the emotional connection. This dynamic also leaves the other partner feeling unsupported and unheard. When you bring up concerns and he refuses to engage, you're left feeling invalidated and invisible. Over time, this emotional neglect can lead to feelings of loneliness as you're left facing issues on your own without the support of your partner. You may start to feel like your feelings don't matter or that you're constantly walking on eggshells, afraid to bring up topics that are important to you because you know he'll just avoid them.